So next up we have a man who definitely doesn't need any introduction, Sir Martin Sorrow. Oh, really? Okay, great. So I'm just going to run through a few questions with Martin today. One of the things that's the theme of Connect, obviously with the massive Welcome to the Future sign, is that we view this conference to be about the future. So for all of those of you here who want to hear about the past, you've probably come to the wrong talk. And besides, what's more important is what you're going to do, Martin, rather than what's happened, surely.
As you will. And we can talk about the past, we can talk about the present, we can try and talk about the future, whatever you want.
Future sounds good. Although I do have two questions that I wanted to start with. And one of the questions that I don't think has ever really been asked for you with WPP is, why did you start it in the first place?
Why did I start what?
WPP.
Well, I guess it was an attack of male menopause. I was at the age of 40, which is I remember Jeremy Bullmore always used to say we should put a little flag on people's computers when they were 3 months off their 40th birthday, because
a bit like Logan's
nobody
Run.
in the audience is 40, so they don't know what I'm talking about. But you would, at that age, you would look back at your first 20 years, and you would look at your next 20 years, and you would sort of reflect on what you'd done and what you wanted to do, and therefore it was a very reflective moment. Now, it may be that now, as people tend to maybe work past the age of 60, like myself, that it's a little bit different, but I think it still holds true. There's a point when you've done something, or you think you've done something, when you're looking at what your objectives are. I'm talking about from a career point of view, less so from a family point of view maybe, or a society point of view, and you figure out. So the answer to the question is, it was a reflective moment. My dad said, find an industry that you enjoy, find a company within it you enjoy, build a reputation, and then if you want to start something on your own, go ahead and do it. So that's what I did, and at the age of 40 we branched out. I had a partner at that time who was a stockbroker. We found this small wire and plastic products company, and which was worth about £1 million at the time. And the other is history. I mean, now with S4 Capital, we found this company called Derriston, which had a market cap of 2 million, and now has a market cap of 300 million. So we're sort of in the same process. Well, I'm not saying for one moment that S4 Capital will be like Wire and Plastic Products or WPP, or indeed, the third iteration was Saatchi's, who I joined, in the mid-80s when Morris and Charles sold their agency effectively, or reversed their agency, into Garland Compton, and that was history too. The rest was history in that. That was a phase of building a global business. That was, as we were talking just before, across the road, that was a royalty on the growth of US business and UK business and other countries' businesses abroad. That was the Theodore Levitt 1983 article in the Harvard Business Review about globalization. The second iteration of that was WPP, which was more about, it was not only about globalization, but the change in technology. So you had two buckets, really, that WPP was focused on. One was geographical expansion, particularly Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe. And then the second piece was technological change, which started to impact the business really at the beginning of the 90s, maybe mid-90s, and then through into the new millennium. And then I would say S4 Capital is there's a bit about geography. I mean, we'll make an announcement tomorrow, which is sort of a geographic push. But beyond that, it's really about technology and the impact of technology. I mean, S4 Capital is about the impact that the 10 major technology companies have on our clients and ourselves. So by that I mean the fearsome five. So Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Amazon, the Chinese two, Tencent and Alibaba, and then the three software companies, Adobe, Salesforce and Oracle. It's those 10 companies and what's happening to them and their fortunes, which may fluctuate. I mean, we're going through a stock market reverse at the moment around the prospects for technology, given what's been happening in the trade wars between, or the trade war between the US and China, and chips and microcomputer chips and the like. But essentially what S4 Capital is about is it's also about geography, but it's primarily about technology. So it's actually quite a neat change from Saatchi's, which was more about geography, Wire and Plastic Products, or WPP, it was about continuation of geography and the beginnings of technology, and then S4 Capital, which is really dominated by the technological shifts.
And what made you decide to do it all again?
Well, the thought of sort of sitting at home twiddling my thumbs, even though I have a young daughter of 2. I mean, I guess the young daughter of 2 means I have to go out and earn a living. So the answer is there's another mouth to feed. Listen, I'm not a golfer. I don't want to offend anybody in the audience who plays golf, or anybody who might be listening or watching golf. I mean, golf is, I think, for older men. I always used to say that when I worked for Mark McCormack and lived to tell the story. So I'm not that way inclined. I don't like portfolio, dipping in and dipping out and non-executive roles. So I wanted something that, and I think the challenge, which I'm sure, the headline is Welcome to the Future. I call it Back to the Future. That the challenge is to find the new way of doing things. I mean, we call about S4 Capital as being new era advertising and marketing services. But what structure do we have to put in place? What services do we have to put in place? What people do we have to put in place to capitalize on the shifts that are taking place with clients, with media, with consumers? And that, I think, is the challenge. So we've pegged out 3 areas that you know. We've talked about content, digital content. We've talked about digital media planning and buying, which we'll shortly make a move on. And then finally, we've talked about first-party data. Those 3 areas, when I look at WPP, those are the 3 areas that are growing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that is probably stagnant, a lot of stuff that's got even more strategic issues, but also a lot of stuff that, putting it crudely, that's growing. And if I look at the 20 billion portfolio that they had when I left, of revenue, the 3 areas where you saw significant growth, and these are broad areas, were the digital content, so companies like AKQA, like VML, like Wunderman, like Ogilvy One when it was Ogilvy One, although it's now part of the singular Ogilvy brand. So that would be one area. First-party data, you dip into Kantar, you find Kantar World Panel, you find the media measurement business, you find Lightspeed, the online panel. And then finally, digital media planning and buying, you find companies like Essence and Xaxis in programmatic and digital media planning and buying, which is where you see significant growth too. So it's really trying to find a way of developing an organization at scale, because we've started from 0. We're now up to $100 million. Maybe in a week or so's time we'll be at a higher level of traction. We've got 850 people, but that, in the context of what I was used to dealing with, obviously is not the same league. I've described it as a peanut becoming a coconut. We'll see what's next after a coconut.
How much of your own money did you put in?
I put in £40 million. We raised another £11 million from a group of institutions on the understanding that they would underwrite the first deal, which they did do for another 130 million. So we raised, at the end of the day, if you add it all up, about 180 million pounds, which in the context of the industry is small. It's about $250 million, and that, in the context of A, the industry, and B, what we want to do, is, what our ambitions are, is not significant.
One of the things I've always wanted to understand was, with WPP, obviously you bought a shell company, and with S4 you bought a shell company. Why is it that you keep buying shell companies rather than
Well,
starting from scratch?
the public markets do give you access to funding and quick access to funding. There are alternative ways of doing it. You can do what is known as a SPAC, which is a special purpose acquisition vehicle company. The process in America is a little bit more complex. A lot of people say to me, why do you want to run a listed company, given all the regulatory issues surrounding companies? I'm not, I have a B share in this structure, so I have a sort of certain control rights, not as strong as Mark Zuckerberg's control rights, but sort of directionally in that area.
Not as strong as what you had at WPP.
Well, I didn't have any rights. I was just a 2% and still am a 2%. I'm a suffering 2% shareholder.
Are you going to go to the shareholders meeting?
I didn't go to the last one. Listen, you can make your views known. You don't have to go to annual general meetings to make your views. And actually, to be fair, most shareholders don't make their views known at the AGM. They make them known before or during the course of the year. So I wouldn't be a shrinking violet in making my views. And if you want me to go through what my views are, I'm happy to do so. But no, I just think a listed vehicle gives you access. There's restrictions. There are regulatory restrictions that make it more difficult and maybe a little bit more cumbersome. But at its heart, it gives you the flexibility to do things on scale. I mean, I've always been interested in scale. And I think, the new environment, scale may be a little bit less important, but I still am absorbed with how you can build scale in our industry. Our industry has always been described historically as a craft industry when I first started. I've always regarded it as being a business. Some people in the audience might disagree, but it's not a craft. It is a business, and you have to bring together the mad men and the mad women and the maths men and the maths women, and that's, how do you do that? I mean, you've got people speaking at this conference who still, I think, look back on the rose-tinted Don Draper era, the Mad Men era, with some nostalgia. And I think life has changed. The definition of content or creativity, we're just as concerned at Media Monks and S4 Capital about big ideas and creativity as anybody else in the industry of any nature. The issue is it's a different kind. From Creative Pool that the definition of creativity has shifted dramatically from where it was in the 80s and 90s. And yet there are people that rigidly insist on looking back, as I say, with rose-tinted spectacles, at the way that people used to develop big ideas 30, 40, 50 years ago. Life has changed. And there are different types of creativity, and you can have data analysts who are creative, you can have media planners who are creative, you have media buyers that are creative. The definition is far greater, and it is not the preserve of the creative director of a traditional industry with his or her, mainly his, Ferrari or corner office or expense account or whatever it happens to be.
Interesting enough, that's when I called Creative Pool, it was purely because of that fact as well. When I first came to the UK and people started calling creatives creative, was actually the first time I found out that actually meant a specific thing rather than a skill set.
Well, if you go to Amsterdam, where Media Monks' home is in Hilversum, I mean, they have 400 people there, and half of them are what one might call nerds, and half of them are creative. And so it's a good mixture, and you and I were talking about this, and you've had significant experience of Victor and Wesley at Victor Knapp and Wesley Tahar at the two founders of Media Monks, and that they are, and you said yourself, they're a sort of a unique blend of technology and creativity, and that effectively is what we're about. And the next thing we will do will just be emblematic of that. We'll make a move in media planning and buying, in programmatic, which will then, what you've effectively got is data fueling content and fueling media planning and buying. So it's a sort of a virtuous loop. Data supplies information on what content is appropriate. It supplies information on media planning and buying. Data, by the way, doesn't destroy creativity. In my view, it makes it more effective. And for anybody to say, whatever their creative credentials are, that it destroys creativity or impugns it or reduces it is nonsense.
I agree. So, going on from that fact, I mean, what do you think the biggest issues or challenges are facing agencies today?
Well, I mean, I'm not that worried about. I'm worried about what are the opportunities and challenges that we face. And if I look at where we are at the moment, we have a very good client list, but it doesn't have the required depth. So if, Media Monks is 100 million of euros of revenue, its biggest client is roughly 10% of that, which is not the depth that it needs. So we have to penetrate the existing client list and beyond, brands, companies, corporations, to a much more significant degree. Now, it may be that we're in the foothills of very significant structural change in the internet, maybe, and that the reason it's so fragmented may be because we are in the foothills. I mean, I liken it to when we started Warren Plastic Products. There was this snotty attitude of the above the line. We used to call it above the line and below the line.
Still exists.
Yeah, and the people who were above the line, it was below the salt. Look at people who made shelf wobblers or were in sales promotion or design or whatever, and they looked down their noses, and it was as if this was an inferior. And of course, the worm turned, and it sort of inverted. And I think that when we talk about the sort of things that we're focused on, content and let's call it programmatic, or media planning and buying, digital media planning and buying, there's a sort of similar attitude, and it's in the foothills of growth, it's in the beginnings, and I think both areas will become significantly more important, driven by first-party data. I was having a conversation with somebody this morning as to whether we should call it first-party data or not, because there's valuable third-party data as well. But I think first-party data is the key. That's the data that our clients own. That's the data that Amazon, Facebook, Google, Tencent, Alibaba own, and deploying that in an effective way. And our clients, I can think of somebody who has 100 million customers in the US and the UK, and somebody who has 90 million in Asia, both of whom we're sort of looking at in terms of the data platforms they have, who have very significant opportunities to use that first-party data to develop better content and therefore better connection with their consumers, their customers, and better media planning and buying. So I think that's where we're at. As far as the agencies are concerned, the problem they have is you have to fly the aeroplane and change the engines at the same time, which is what I was wrestling with when I was at WPP. Our strategy then remains, I haven't seen any change, simplifying the verticals, client and country management, and then a digital underpinning to everything, which basically is what every one of the 6 holding companies is doing. The difference is the speed with which they do it.
So you didn't really mention brands in that chat as far as what they could be doing as servicing their customers for their own creativity rather than relying on the agencies. Is this a trend that we're going to continue to see?
The challenge is, basically, what are the charge sheet against the traditional agency business has been Google and Facebook are eating our lunch. I don't agree with that. Having jumped over the wall, if I can put it that way, I see more evidence of an ability to partner with Google and Facebook and Amazon than before. My view of life before. So I don't buy that. The simple fact is WPP had a $5 billion relationship when I left with Google and a $2 billion relationship with Facebook. So, the fact is that there was a very significant partnership. They were the 1 and 3 biggest media owners that we dealt with, inventory sellers, right? So I don't say that. The second charge is, the consultants are eating our lunch. Yeah, there's an article today about Shell or Wunderman losing part of its business to Accenture Interactive on Shell. Again, I don't buy it, because for every one of Accenture Interactive gaining, you can find them losing as well. And the thought that Accenture just bought its fourth agency in Germany, Kohlrebe, which is a good creative agency. It may have had a bit more challenges recently, but it's basically a good agency. But, you know, Sinner Schrader and the other two agencies that they bought, they're just running into the same rabbit hole, or running down the same rabbit hole as the agency holding companies. They're going to have exactly the same problem. What they do is they hit the top, the CEO, CMO, CIO, CTO, Chief Technology Officer level very well. So they sell in big programs. And remember, Accenture is a $100 billion beast. The largest agency beast now is no longer WPP. It's actually, you could argue, Vivendi, but then Omnicom, and then WPP. But the biggest would be around 20 billion US, whereas Accenture is 5 times the size. Second biggest would be Cognizant, around 40, 45, and then you have Capgemini at around 20. So the consulting companies are bigger, and they access senior levels of the organization for bigger projects. So they don't, you know, muck about with the smaller stuff that we muck about with. They're in there upstairs, and they use it. They're using these acquisitions for activation. So that's the second charge. So I would say, you know, S4 Capital has to have a relationship with a digital transformation company at some point in time in the future. We'll focus on the 3 things: on content, on data, and on digital media planning and buying. But in the long term, we have to have a capability. You know, if you were the CEO of a client, that I can say to you, look, we have access to people who do digital transformation. The third charge is what you said about in-housing. Now, there is more in-housing, but there are 2 big issues around in-housing. How do you get the talent? And how do you update the technology? I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying those are 2 areas, and the move that we make in media planning and buying, you will see we will go into insourcing, in-housing, but we will, you know, we'll have variable models, totally transparent in the fullest sense of the word, in-housing, hybrid models, in-housing and out-housing and out-housing. But the 2 issues that remain the critical issues, in my view, are how do you attract and keep the best talent at the client?
Well, that's the problem.
And the technology.
Now,
I think there are ways of overcoming it, by the way, but it's the issue.
If you went through to the universities and asked them, would you rather work at Google or Facebook, or whether you would rather work at Saatchi's or BBH, I mean, there's only going to be one answer.
Yeah, but that's the wrong question. I mean, with all due respect to Saatchi's has been crushed out of existence, and BBH has been crushed out of existence.
I was hard to find an example.
The more apt question is, would you rather work at Facebook or Google or AKQA? Or, say, I took my direct experience, VML or Wunderman or Ogilvy One or Huge. You had somebody from Huge here just now. Or from RGA. That's the question. You know, wrong question. What you're saying is that would you rather work for a modern technology company or a legacy company? When you say Saatchi or BBH. I mean, Saatchi or BBH...
You could have inserted any agency name in there. You know that.
Yeah, but... Well, you know exactly what I mean. I mean, within the holding companies, as I said, there is growth. But where you see the growth is 40% of the industry. Now, the industry is a $1 trillion industry. 500 billion is in media. That's old and new. 40% of that 500 billion, 200 billion, is digital, 100 in the US and 100 outside. That's roughly the dynamics. The other 500 billion to make the trillion for the whole industry is in data and everything else, PR and everything else. It's that 40%, that 200 billion that I'm focused on, that Huge is focused on, that RGA is focused on, and then we're using that as the sort of Trojan horse to go further. But it's the comparison, I think you know, I have a sort of different view. I think it's easier for us today to attract young people. We did this WPP fellowship program, 3 years, 3 different continents, 3 different functions. it was described by the Wall Street Journal as harder to get into than the Harvard Business School. And it's still, John Steele, unfortunately, is leaving WPP, but he ran that program, you know, a very renowned planner, probably one of the best planners in the industry. And John ran that program with immense vigor and focus, and it's a great program. Those people were really attracted to the industry because we were exposing them to the growth parts, not the legacy parts. So what I'm saying is don't sell us short.
I wasn't selling you short, I was asking a question. That's very different. What's the biggest growth to happen sector-wise?
What is what?
Biggest growth sector-wise and country-wise over the next 5 years?
Voice, to me, I mean, that's the battleground. You know, Alexa and Amazon, I mean, it sort of went a little bit unreported, but if you went back to this time last year, there was a real dogfight between Google Home and Alexa, you know, as to get the disc or to get the speaker into every room in your house. It's a real estate battle. Because the belief was once you got it in, you know, it's rather like bugs, you can't get it out. I mean, there's lots of issues around privacy. You know, we've had some recent publicity in the last few days around Google and information in your home and access, healthcare data and everything else. But I think, to my mind, that is where the statistic that always amazes me is that already 55, according to Kantar, 55% of product searches in the US go through Amazon, and increasing proportion is going through Alexa. And what you see is different pricing strategies. I think it's true to say, for example, if I say to Alexa, what is the cheapest battery, which is Amazon batteries, which they have a 30% share of the US market, if I order it voice, I get it cheaper than if I order it on the site. Yep. Or baby wipes. I'm an expert on baby wipes. 30% market share, Amazon baby wipes, they're the cheapest. So, to my mind, that's where I think the biggest, most interesting opportunities are going to come. And there will be this battle between, you know, the three prominent platforms, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, in two areas. One is search, and the second is advertising. So just, you know, I've seen no evidence that Facebook is losing out when you think about Facebook as a whole. I have seen evidence already that Facebook itself is under pressure, but the pressure is taken off by Instagram. I mean, so Facebook as a whole doesn't lose. That's what I think at the moment is happening. So pressure on Facebook for all the reasons that have been discussed. But the good news is switch to Instagram. Google, but there are two areas. So Facebook last year had about 40 billion of advertising. This year it'll be about 50, 55, despite all the problems. Google was 100, it'll be 125 billion. Amazon is only at 10. My prediction for what it's worth.
It's making money though this time. What? It's actually making profit for a change. So.
Well, and Amazon, you know, but Jeff has that wonderful structure that I touched on before, so he can play the game, you know, as he sees fit, and he accelerates puts his foot down on the profit accelerator when he has to do it, and puts his foot on the brake when he has to do it. But Amazon is up to 10 billion now, running rate, 2.5 a quarter. It will get to 100 billion, but it will not take. It's not after P&G and Unilever. I mean, it is in a way. It's after the long tail. It's after the small and medium-sized enterprise. That's what people don't understand. Google, Facebook, its heartland in search and in advertising is not with the big boys and girls. It's with the small and medium-sized enterprises. That's where Amazon's going to go, big time. And so you're going to see a big fight there. And then, of course, the Chinese, Tencent and Alibaba, we have to see what they do internationally. Even the Chinese government, I sense, at a federal and local level, are worried about the scale and size of Tencent and Alibaba and their access to data and their control of data. So I think that you'll see the Chinese government, where you have already, limiting the growth of these. And they use, it's a fascinating thing. Tencent and Alibaba say, if you regulate us, you let the Americans in, which is exactly the same argument as Google, Facebook, and Amazon use about, you know, if you limit us, you regulate us, you let the Chinese in.
Great. Let's end there. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm assuming that some people might have some questions. Does anybody have a question?
Nobody has questions. Okay. Can you say who you are and where you're from?
And just wait, Ollie, grab a mic.
You can come forward if you can't.
Yeah, you mentioned, sorry, Ollie, by the way, from Hidden, which is that company over there in the corner. You mentioned the importance of retaining talent for these agencies and brands. Is there a way in which you think they can do that, or in fact, a way that agencies can better brands or businesses to retain their talent?
I couldn't hear you either.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Yeah, so is there a way that agencies can retain their talent after the likes of Google and Facebook and other brands are trying to steal them?
I think relatively we're in a better position than, let's say, the 90s. So before the growth of Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the like, I think we had a much more difficult... And again, the question that I was asked about, would you rather work at BBH or Saatchi's than Facebook, Google, is the wrong question. Because, just to underline it, the real bellwether comparison is RGA, Huge, AKQA, VML, whatever it happens to be. And I think we're actually relatively in a better position. That doesn't underestimate the power of those technology companies, or indeed others, in terms of attracting talent. But I think the relative opportunity is, the gap is easier now, and that we can attract people, young people. I saw it in the WPP fellowship program. These tended to be graduates, two levels, undergraduates just graduating, and postgraduates. And design schools, art schools, film schools, and we tried to make it as diverse as possible. And I think, look, if you just think about our industry, geographically it's diverse. WPP is a third US, a third Europe, and a third Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East. And we offer tremendous geographic diversity. And then what we do is very diverse, and you can pick where you want to go. If I was starting again, I would, learn Chinese and learn code, and I would do the WPP fellowship program with, digital in the US, go to China in any function, and then maybe go to Latin America the third year or something like that. But I think we undersell ourselves, actually. I really do. And then all of the technology companies are running into some issues. That doesn't mean that they will not be dominant in 5 or 10 years' time. Who knows? But they are running into some issues. And, if you're trying to run Google or Facebook or Amazon at the moment, they're well rehearsed publicly. Look at all the issues that you have to do with a highly articulate, highly intelligent, to some extent diverse population, and it's not easy. So
would you not consider would you not consider MediaMonks to be a tech company?
To be
a tech company.
Well, it's half creative, half tech.
So you got
it is. Look, we can argue about the scale, but it is, to your point, because you and I talked about this. It is Mad Men plus Maths Men, or Mad Women plus Maths Women. It is.
So you already know that the traditional ad agency's on the way out.
You're putting words in my mouth.
Trying.
Look, every business is no different to being in the automobile industry, to being in the steel industry. Every industry has digital disruption, transformation affecting it. So the best analogy is flying the aeroplane and trying to change the engines at the same time. An impossible task. I mean, it's a very difficult task. And the agencies, the ones you mentioned in your question about where would you rather work, and the ones that I would put into that question, all of them, even the ones that have adapted, face the same challenge. They have to go faster. So But you know, your question about Media Monks is a good one because they've changed the model and adapted their model to a technology and creative model, which is, you know, nothing is unique. There are other people that do similar things, but they've managed to get it to a momentum and scale.
Are they on your list?
Sorry?
Are they on your list? The other companies that do it, are they on your list?
Well, there are other companies that come. I'd like to do, you know, we've brought Media Monks into the family. I want to do something in media planning and buying, in programmatic, and then I want to do one other content-related company, and then get to about sort of 300 million of revenue, about sort of 45, 50 of EBITDA.
If anybody owns a content agency, please feel free to give me a card and I'll pass it on to Martin.
And we sit and wait. Yeah.
It's John Reynolds. I'm a freelance journalist. Just following on from that, from what you said...
You're looking for copy, John, are you?
I'm afraid so.
It has to be accurate copy there.
Right, you remember.
You remember that?
I do, indeed. Yeah, well, we can have a debate about that. From what you said on the stage there, it sounds as though you're very close to doing your second deal. I think you said maybe in a week or two.
Tomorrow. Tomorrow's the announcement? Is tomorrow the announcement?
No. Geographic. In terms of a deal for Mighty Hive, that's likely to be within the next 2 weeks, is it?
Sorry, the deal with what?
Mighty Hive, well...
I think you saw the announcement of the company that we were talking to a number of candidates.
But that's
so you mustn't, you know, Lionel Barber got very upset when I said that the FT was notoriously erroneous. So I won't say it's notoriously erroneous. Occasionally erroneous is probably the betterment.
But you're very close to doing that deal. It's likely to be announced.
We are very close to doing something.
Okay. And secondly, very quickly, John Hegarty, who I think is speaking tomorrow here,
right,
controversially said, "I don't think Sorrell will have a legacy. The people who have a legacy in this industry are the creative people."
People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Any other response?
People in glass houses should be very careful. I mean, it's a serious point that and it came up in the question that I was asked about, you know, where would you rather work? When you know, I have the greatest respect for BBH or Saatchi's. I mean, I worked at Saatchi's, or Leo Burnett. But when you put a brand name, and we're meant to understand about brands, by the way, when you put the Publicis name over everybody who works at Saatchi's, what do they call it? Publicis advertising, I think call it? Everybody at Saatchi's, everybody at Leo Burnett, and everybody at BBH, what do they think? That's one. When you put the Sapient name, and I'm not saying the Sapient brand is a bad brand, it's probably a good brand, but you put the Sapient brand over, I've lost count, but let's go through them. LBI, Digitas, Rosetta, and Razorfish, all of which have disappeared. What do you get? You get two brands, and you lose the brand power. You know, when VML merged with Y&R, which is something that we were already doing before I left WPP, I said publicly I would have had Y&R VML because VML's people assumed all the leading positions and the Y&R people were effectively pushed out. And I think it would have been better balance, particularly as VML is better known in the US. You know, it's basically seen as being a Kansas-based digital company, which is unfair because it is global. Second biggest operation is in Shanghai. Might have 1,000 people in Kansas City, but I think Shanghai is their second biggest operation. But from an industry point of view, these brands do have value. So coming back to legacies and brands, I think that's the problem.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question.
There's a man drowning at the back there. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Arnold from Cuman, a Chinese digital marketing agency. And so you talked about, Martin, about Alibaba and Tencent, so technology companies a lot. I was just wondering what your views are on the creative and marketing industry in China, because it's relatively new. It's only been around for 20, 30 years. In many ways, they're still quite behind on the quality of thinking and execution. But I think in terms of application of technology, data creativity, they're starting to catch up. So I was just wondering if you had any plans for S4 in China and what you thought about the industry.
We're already in Shanghai and in Singapore. our Asian business, we'll be making an announcement about Asia tomorrow, about what we're doing in Asia. But I think you're underselling yourself. There have been, one of the problems in China, when I left WPP, we were talking about trying to get Alibaba and Tencent to take an interest in WPP China, which was our third largest business, and with about 16 or 17,000 people and 1.7 billion or thereabouts of revenue. I mean, it was a big business. And the reason for doing that was trying to localize it. And the reason we wanted to localize it is there were too many expats.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And, when does an expat become a pat? Expats have habits of staying expats for the rest of their lives on lavish expense allowances and, schooling and living things. And as you well know, you're nodding your head, that causes a little bit of a problem with the locals. Also, up until recently, the Chinese stock markets have been very strong, and young people coming out of university, I used to describe it as got green eyes. They thought they could all make fortunes by listing. So companies like Leo, there's an agency in China called Leo, or Blue Focus, or Guangzhou Advertising, all of which had very high market values, attracted people's attentions. Now, it's a long answer, but I think it's really important. When I was there in Shanghai about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the thing that amazed me, I saw three companies that were going to list. And they were all going to list to raise money for working capital. And the biggest problem, and again, you're nodding your head in agreement, I think, is that young people who want to start companies cannot, because of payment terms, cannot get funding. The banks will not lend to smaller companies and startups to get going, which is strange because that's an engine of employment. We know in Western economies, the biggest engines of employment, and China needs employment to absorb the rural workforce that come into the cities every year, so you need it. So there's some really interesting dynamics which play currently in our favor. They didn't before, but they do now. So I think you underplay, there's 1.3 billion Chinese. Last time I checked, there were about 60 million people on this island, and there are about 300 million plus 330, I think it is, in the US. So let's put it all together. There's 400 million. The Chinese will win.
So I think the biggest problem, thank you for that. I think the big...
We've got to stop. I'm sorry.
All right. That's it?
That's it.
Anybody has a question, Martin at s4capital.com.
He'll answer within 15 minutes.